What if the shirt on your chest could erase your future before you even say hello? First day, one chance. And Claire Halston, fresh off weeks of unemployment and quiet humiliation, accidentally walks into her new job wearing a message she never meant anyone important to read. In the subway's dark reflection, she sees it, and her stomach drops. CEOs are trash. She wants to run, but she's spent years shrinking to survive. So she buttons the blazer, whispers, "You belong there," and walks in anyway. Then in a glass hallway, a man's eyes drop to the words. No smirk, no punishment. He reads, really reads. And the twist, he's the billionaire CEO, and the stranger she insulted days earlier. This isn't a comedy or a victory lap, it's a collision between dignity and power. The mirror was fogged over just enough that Claire Halston could pretend not to see herself. She stood in the narrow bathroom of her South Boston apartment, the hum of the old radiator, clicking like an impatient metronome, steam curling up from the shower she'd turned on and forgotten to step into. She rested both palms on the sink, leaned forward, and whispered the words she'd practiced all week. "You belong there." Her voice sounded strange in the small room, thinner than she wanted but steady enough to pass. She said it again. Slower this time, like a prayer she didn't fully believe in yet. Outside the bathroom door, the apartment was quiet in the way only unemployed apartments are. No rushing, no urgency, just the heavy awareness of time passing. A stack of unopened envelopes sat on the kitchen counter. Rent, utilities, a credit card reminder she already knew by heart. Claire didn't need to open them to feel their weight. Today was supposed to be different. Today she finally had somewhere to go. Marketing strategy lead, Waverly Meridian Technologies. A real title, a real salary, health insurance again, a glass building downtown with clean lines, and the kind of reputation people respected without asking follow-up questions. One interview. One chance. She shut off the water, wiped the mirror with her sleeve, and studied her reflection. 39. Fine lines she hadn't earned gently. Brown hair pulled back tight the way she did when she needed to feel in control. She looked capable. Not hopeful, but capable would do. Claire stepped into her bedroom and dressed, quickly, deliberately, like she was assembling armor. Slacks, sensible heels, the blazer she'd bought years ago for a job that had chewed her up and spit her out. She hesitated at the chair by the bed, where yesterday's clothes lay in a small, careless pile. She grabbed a black t-shirt without looking too closely. Soft, familiar, something she could breathe in. She pulled it on, smoothed it down, and shrugged into the blazer, buttoning it immediately. There. Presentable. The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen as she checked the time. Plenty early. She poured the coffee, didn't taste it, and stood for a moment, staring out the window at the brick building across the alley. Someone else's life. Someone else's morning. Everyone else moving forward like the ground hadn't fallen out from under them once already. She grabbed her bag and keys and left. The April air was sharp, still undecided about being spring. Claire walked fast, heels clicking against cracked pavement, every step carrying a mix of urgency and disbelief. She hadn't taken the subway at this hour in weeks. Months, maybe. It felt like rejoining a current she'd been watching from shore. On the platform, she stood near the edge, shoulders squared, eyes forward. The electronic sign flickered. 2 minutes. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jenna. "You've got this. And if they don't see it, that's their loss." Claire smiled despite herself and typed back, "I'll call you later." She tucked the phone away, adjusted the strap of her bag, and finally allowed herself a long breath. The platform window was dark enough to reflect her faintly. She loosened her blazer just a little more out of habit than intention. The train tunnel breathed hot air as it approached, a low rumble echoing up the tracks. And then she saw it. White letters. Bold. Unapologetic. CEOs are trash. For a split second, her brain refused to translate what her eyes were seeing. The reflection didn't make sense. It hovered there, floating on her chest like a bad joke that had missed its cue. Her heart dropped so fast it felt like her body forgot how to stand. No. No, no, no. Claire's hands flew to her blazer, fingers fumbling, pulling it shut like she could erase the words by covering them. Her breath came shallow fast. Heat rushed to her face, then drained away, leaving her cold. The shirt. The stupid shirt. Jenna's half-drunk gift from weeks ago. The one Claire had worn around the apartment on days when bitterness needed somewhere to sit. The one she never wore outside, except apparently she had. The train roared into the station brakes, screaming, doors sliding open with mechanical indifference. People surged forward. The moment demanded a decision. Go home, miss the first impression, apologize, explain, maybe reschedule, maybe lose the job before it even began, or get on the train and walk into that building, wearing a sentence that could end everything. Claire stood frozen, as commuters brushed past her, annoyance flickering across their faces. Someone muttered something under their breath. The doors chimed again. This was how it always started, wasn't it? One small mistake. One thing out of place. Proof that she didn't quite belong in rooms like the one she was headed toward. Her mind raced with explanations she would never get to give. It's ironic. It's not about you. I was angry once. None of it mattered. Words on fabric didn't come with footnotes. The doors began to close. Claire stepped forward. She didn't know exactly when she decided. It wasn't dramatic. There was no swelling music in her head. Just a quiet, stubborn refusal that rose up from somewhere deeper than fear. I won't start my new life by running. She boarded the train. Inside, she found a pole to hold and stared at the floor, blazer clutched tight, shoulders tense. Every stop felt louder than the last. Every reflection in the windows threatened to betray her again. She imagined the lobby, the receptionist's eyes flicking downward, a raised eyebrow, a polite smile that didn't reach the face. She imagined the word unprofessional sliding across a conference table like a blade. Her chest tightened, but beneath the panic something else stirred, a strange, steady resolve. She had been talked over, undervalued, dismissed with a smile that pretended it was kindness. She had swallowed more than she should have for the sake of peace, for the sake of rent, for the sake of not being difficult. This wasn't a slogan to her, it was a scar. The train slowed as it approached downtown. Claire lifted her chin, rolled her shoulders back, and loosened her grip on the blazer just enough to breathe. Whatever happened next, she would walk into it, standing up. The doors opened. She stepped onto the platform, heart hammering, unaware that a few blocks away in a glass building catching the morning light, someone would soon read those words and decide not to look away. And that decision would change everything. Claire learned to hold her breath in conference rooms, long before she learned to speak in them. It started years ago at a company whose name she still avoided, saying out loud as if naming it might give it permission to hurt her again. A consumer brand with sleek packaging, clever slogans, and a CEO who liked to describe himself as visionary, while everyone else quietly described him as dangerous. Back then, Claire believed in bosses. She believed in hierarchies that made sense. In leaders who listened, in the idea that if you worked hard, kept your head down, and brought results to the table, you would be safe. For a while, that belief even seemed reasonable. She was good at her job. Better than good. She could see patterns in numbers the way some people saw colors. She noticed when sales curves bent before they broke, when messaging missed its audience by inches that turned into miles. She warned early. She documented everything. She stayed late without being asked. And for a time, the numbers climbed. Until they didn't. The meeting that changed everything took place on a Tuesday morning in a glass-walled room that reflected everyone back at themselves. The kind of room designed to make you feel exposed, even before you opened your mouth. Claire sat with her notebook, open pen aligned carefully along the spine. She already knew what the agenda would pretend not to say. A downturn, a board restless for answers, a sacrifice. The CEO arrived late, as he often did, coffee in hand, smile already sharpened. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "Let's talk about performance," he said, settling into his chair like a judge taking the bench. Specifically marketing. The way the air in the room tightened, like everyone had silently agreed on where the blame would land. She raised her hand slightly, not enough to interrupt, just enough to signal readiness. "I actually flagged this risk last quarter," she said when there was a pause, her voice steady, measured. "The supply delays were always going to." He laughed, not loud. Not cruel in the obvious way. Just a quick, dismissive sound like someone brushing crumbs off a table. "Let's let the grown-ups talk," he said, smiling around the room. Around her, a few people shifted uncomfortably. No one said anything. Silence, she would later realize, was its own kind of agreement. The meeting continued without her. Charts she'd built were projected on the screen. Numbers she'd explained in emails were twisted into evidence against her. When the downturn was finally addressed directly, her name surfaced, not with context, not with nuance, but as a convenient label. Marketing failed. She tried again. Cleared her throat, opened her mouth. The CEO cut her off with a raised hand, palm out, benevolent. "We don't need excuses," he said. "We need accountability." Accountability. The word sounded noble. It felt like a verdict. By the end of the meeting, the decision had already been made. The follow-up was scheduled before she even returned to her desk. Human resources. 2 chairs. 1 box. The HR director smiled the entire time. Not unkindly, just distantly, as if this were a script she'd rehearsed often enough that emotion had become unnecessary. "This isn't personal," she said, sliding papers across the table. "We're restructuring." Claire nodded. She signed where she was told. Her hands didn't shake until the security guard appeared at the door. "Take your time," he said gently, as if kindness could soften the humiliation of being walked out past people who refused to meet her eyes. She packed her desk in silence. A framed photo, a notebook full of ideas that would never be hers again, a mug with a chip in the rim she'd always meant to replace. When the elevator doors closed, she stood alone with her reflection and felt something inside her crack, not loudly but completely. Jenna was waiting for her that night with takeout and wine, and the kind of anger that comes from loving someone who's been wronged. "They don't deserve you," Jenna said, pacing the living room. "They used you and then tossed you out." Like Claire shook her head. She didn't want rage. Rage was loud, rage burned out. What she felt was quieter, heavier. A few days later, when the shock had settled into something like grief, Jenna showed up again, this time with a paper bag and a crooked grin. "I saw this and thought of you," she said, pulling out the black t-shirt. "CEOs are trash." Claire stared at it, then laughed despite herself. The sound surprised her. It came from somewhere she thought had gone numb. "It's stupid," she said. "Maybe," Jenna replied, "but maybe it's armor. The kind you can joke about so it doesn't cut as deep." That night, Claire wore it around the apartment. She didn't post pictures. She didn't make statements. She just let herself feel the truth of it. Not that all CEOs were terrible, but that power unchecked could rot people from the inside out. That humiliation didn't always come with yelling. Sometimes it came with smiles and laughter and words like accountability that meant you're expendable. Weeks later, alone staring at the city lights through her window, Claire said the words out loud for the first time. "Never again." Her voice didn't waver. "Never again. Not like that." The shirt became something she wore on hard days, a reminder that she had survived something that tried to make her small. A private protest, a quiet line drawn in ink she couldn't erase. She never intended for anyone important to see it. And yet, as she stood now on a downtown sidewalk, blazer buttoned, tight memories pressing in from all sides, Claire felt the past and present collide in her chest. This wasn't about anger, it was about dignity. She looked up at the building ahead of her glass, catching the light, and wondered not for the first time whether believing again was bravery or just another way to get hurt. She took a step forward anyway. The lobby didn't feel like a place where people got fired. That was the first thing Claire noticed. She stepped through the glass doors of Waverly Meridian and slowed without meaning to her body, reacting before her mind could catch up. The floor was polished, stone pale gray with veins like river lines frozen mid-flow. The lighting was soft, indirect, the kind that made faces gentler instead of sharper. No frantic footsteps. No ringing phones. No one whispering urgently into headsets. Just calm. Too calm. Claire adjusted her bag on her shoulder and approached the reception desk, heels echoing faintly in the open space. The woman behind the desk looked up immediately, not startled, not distracted, and smiled in a way that reached her eyes. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you?" The question sounded sincere. That alone made Claire hesitate. Claire Halston, she replied, offering her ID. I'm here for onboarding. Of course you are, the receptionist said, already typing. Welcome. Welcome. Not sign in. Not have a seat. Welcome. Claire forced herself not to read into it. As she reached into her bag to retrieve a form she'd been emailed, the blazer shifted. Just a fraction. Enough for the letters beneath to peek out bold white against black. CEO's R. She snapped, the blazer closed with a practiced motion, fingers quick, heart jumping. The receptionist didn't react. Or, if she noticed, she didn't let it show. You can head over to the seating area, the woman said, gesturing toward a cluster of low chairs near a wall of windows. Lydia from HR will be right with you. Claire nodded and moved away, choosing a chair that faced the windows rather than the desk. Outside, the city moved at its usual impatient pace, cars inching forward, pedestrians weaving between them. Inside, time felt padded, muted. She sat upright, ankles crossed, hands folded loosely in her lap. Every instinct told her to stay alert. This was when first impressions hardened into permanent shapes. This was when people decided whether you were competent, or difficult, or quietly disposable. She replayed the shirt in her mind like a bruise. She kept pressing to see if it still hurt. A door opened to her left. Claire, the woman approaching her, was in her early 40s, maybe with silver already threading through her dark hair. She wore a simple navy dress, no visible jewelry except a watch with a worn leather band. Her eyes were steady. Kind but not performative. I'm Lydia, she said, extending a hand. I'm glad you're here. Claire stood and shook her hand. The grip was firm. Human. Thank you, Claire said. I'm glad to be here. And for the first time that morning, the words didn't feel like a lie she was borrowing. They walked side by side down a wide hallway lined with glass offices and open workspaces. People looked up as they passed, not with suspicion, not with curiosity sharpened into judgment, but with simple acknowledgement. Good morning. Hey. Morning, Lydia. Each greeting landed softly, like a door being held open instead of slammed shut. Claire's shoulders eased despite herself. She noticed small things. A man laughing quietly with a colleague near the coffee machine. A woman wearing sneakers with her slacks perched on the edge of a desk while explaining something with animated hands. No one flinched when a senior-looking figure walked by. No one lowered their voice. This is different, Claire said before she could stop herself. Lydia smiled just a little. We hear that a lot. They turned a corner and passed a conference room where the air felt denser. Inside, half a dozen people sat around a long table, screens lit, tension, contained rather than spilling. This wasn't panic. It was focus. Board-level energy. Decisions being shaped carefully, not theatrically. As they passed, one of the men inside looked up. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that didn't scream for attention but commanded it anyway. Early 40s, maybe late. His hair was dark, neatly cut, his posture relaxed but precise. His gaze flicked from Lydia to Claire. Then it dropped. Not to her face. To her chest. Claire felt it like a hand pressed flat against her sternum. Time slowed, narrowed. The blazer had shifted again. Not enough to fully expose the words, but enough. She waited for the familiar sequence. The smirk, the raised brow, the silent calculation. It didn't come. He didn't look away, quickly embarrassed or dismissive. He didn't laugh. He didn't frown. He read. Really, read, and then his eyes lifted back to hers. There was no disgust there, no amusement, just something quieter, recognition maybe. Or understanding, the kind that comes from having seen something similar before. The moment lasted no more than a second. Then Lydia guided Claire forward, and the glass wall slid past them like a closing curtain. Claire exhaled only once they were down the hall. You okay? Lydia asked, not slowing. Yes, Claire said automatically. Then more honestly, I think so. They stopped outside a small office with a nameplate. Claire hadn't had time to read. Lydia turned to face her fully now. I want to give you a quick overview of the day, she said. Paperwork, introductions, a walkthrough of your team's current priorities. Nothing overwhelming. Claire nodded, grateful for the normalcy of the words. And Lydia added almost casually, there's one more thing. Here it comes, Claire thought. He likes to meet every final hire personally, Lydia said. The sentence landed heavier than any reprimand could have. Claire's stomach dropped. She echoed. Lydia glanced back down the hallway toward the conference room they'd passed. Our CEO, she said. Grant Waverly. The name rang hollow and loud at the same time. CEO. The word pressed against Claire's chest like a bruise revisited. Oh, Claire said. I didn't realize. It's not an interrogation, Lydia said gently. More of a conversation. He believes culture starts with listening. Listening. Claire thought of another CEO. Another room. Another smile that meant nothing. Her hand drifted unconsciously to the front of her blazer fingers, brushing the fabric beneath. The shirt. The words. The scar she hadn't meant to show. When she asked, "This morning," Lydia replied, "Once the board meeting wraps." Claire nodded, even as her pulse quickened. "Okay," she said. "Okay." As Lydia opened the office door and gestured her inside, Claire took one last breath to steady herself. She had walked through glass doors before. She had survived quiet eyes and loud rooms and smiles that cut, but this felt different, and she didn't know yet whether that made it safer or far more dangerous. The office was too beautiful to be forgiving. That was Claire's first thought as she sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, fingers pressed together just hard enough to still their shaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a painting, harbor water catching the light buildings standing at confident attention. A bookshelf lined one wall filled with books that looked read, not staged. The desk was solid wood, uncluttered, nothing flashy. Power without decoration. Claire kept her blazer buttoned shoulders back, chin level. She had learned how to sit this way years ago, how to arrange herself into something unassailable. Inside, her pulse thudded loud enough she was certain it could be heard. The door opened. Grant Waverly entered without ceremony. He was younger than she'd expected. 47, maybe? Tall, broad, in a way that suggested strength without indulgence. His suit fit perfectly, not because it was expensive, though it probably was, but because it had been chosen carefully. Nothing about him was loud. Nothing needed to be. "Miss Halston," he said, voice calm even. "Thank you for waiting." "Of course," Claire replied, standing smoothly, grateful her legs didn't betray her. They shook hands. His grip was firm, brief. Professional. No flicker of recognition crossed his face. No hint that he had seen her in the hallway. No acknowledgement of the words hidden inches beneath her blazer. If not for his eyes, she might have believed it. They were sharp, observant, missing nothing. When he looked at her, it felt like being assessed not for performance but for structure. As if he were testing whether something solid lived beneath the surface. "Please," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. "Have a seat." She did. Grant settled across from her, folded his hands once, and began as though this were the most ordinary interview in the world. "I've reviewed your background," he said. "Your work at Vail Consumer Group was impressive." The word hung there. Impressive. Carefully neutral. "Thank you," Claire said. "I was proud of what my team accomplished." He nodded slightly. "You've been out of work for several weeks." "Yes." "No consulting in the meantime." "No," she said. "I needed time to recalibrate." Grant studied her for a moment, then made a small note on the pad in front of him. The scratch of pen on paper sounded unnaturally loud. They moved through questions with a steady rhythm. Strategy, risk assessment, leadership philosophy. Claire answered with precision, grounding herself in facts when her nerves threatened to fray. She spoke clearly, deliberately resisting the urge to over-explain. This mattered. She felt like she was walking a narrow bridge suspended over something deep and unforgiving. "Tell me about a time you disagreed with leadership," Grant said, eventually, eyes lifting to meet hers. A significant disagreement. Claire's breath caught not enough to show but enough to feel. She could lie. Offer a safe, polished anecdote. A disagreement resolved through teamwork and mutual respect. The kind of story people like to hear. Instead, she told the truth. "There was a point," she said slowly, choosing each word with care, "when I warned about a downturn that leadership didn't want to acknowledge. The data supported my concern. I pushed for a course correction, and And I was told to stop being alarmist, she said. That my role was execution, not direction. Grant's expression didn't change. What did you do? He asked. I continued documenting my findings, Claire replied. I raised the issue again privately, and when it became clear my input wasn't welcome, I focused on protecting my team from the fallout. And when the downturn came, she met his gaze fully now. I was blamed. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, intentional. Grant leaned back slightly, studying her as if she were a blueprint he hadn't quite finished reading. Some would call that insubordination, he said. Yes, Claire agreed. Some did. And I call it integrity, she said, her voice steady. I was hired for my expertise. Ignoring it would have been dishonest. For the first time, something flickered across Grant's face. Not approval, not disapproval. Interest. He looked at her the way one might look at a structure after discovering it had held under pressure. You were terminated, he said, not unkindly. Yes. Do you regret how you handled it? Claire thought of the glass-walled conference room. No, she said. I regret the environment, not my response to it. Grant nodded once slowly. Another note. They continued. Compensation, expectations, team dynamics. Claire answered each question as if it were a stepping stone across uncertain ground. She was acutely aware of her body, of the blazer, of the words beneath it, of the truth she had carried into this room without intending to show it. Finally, Grant closed his notebook. There's one more thing, he said. Claire felt her stomach tighten. He rose from his chair and moved toward the windows, hands resting lightly on the sill as he looked out over the city. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, without turning around, he said, This morning I noticed your shirt. The room seemed to shrink. Claire's breath stilled. She didn't move. Grant turned back to face her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were searching now, no longer pretending neutrality. Do you still believe what it says? He asked on a good day. The question wasn't accusatory. It wasn't amused. It was personal. Claire swallowed. This was the moment, the one she couldn't prepare for, the one no resume could soften. She could deflect, make a joke, minimize. Instead, she chose honesty. I believe, she said carefully, that unchecked power can make people forget the human cost of their decisions. Grant watched her closely. And CEOs, he pressed. All of them, no, Claire said. I don't believe in absolutes. But I do believe that when leadership values obedience over truth, damage follows. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Grant studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Thank you for your candor, he said. He returned to his desk and sat folding his hands again. We'll continue this conversation, he added. For now, Lydia will show you to your workspace. Claire stood legs steady despite the storm inside her. As she turned to leave, Grant spoke once more. Miss Halston. She paused. Yes, his gaze held hers. First impressions matter, he said, but so does what survives after them. Claire nodded, unsure what it meant, and deeply aware that something irreversible had just begun. Lydia smiled as she stood gathering the folder from the edge of the desk. I'm just going to grab the remaining paperwork, she said lightly. I'll be right back. The door closed behind her with a soft, definitive click. Claire felt it immediately. The silence changed. It wasn't louder. It was heavier, like a held breath that had finally been noticed. Grant didn't move right away. He remained seated, hands folded, gaze lowered to the desk, as if finishing a thought he'd been carrying longer than this meeting. Claire stood where she was, unsure whether she was meant to sit again or remain upright, like someone waiting for a verdict. Then he looked up. This time he didn't stop at her face. His eyes went directly to her chest, not a glance, not a flicker, a full, unguarded look. Claire's fingers twitched toward the blazer out of instinct, but she forced herself to keep her hands still. There was no point pretending anymore. The truth was already in the room, breathing between them. Grant leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and said almost to himself, Boston has a lot of alleys. Claire's heart skipped. Funny, he continued, voice quiet, measured how we picked the same one. The room tilted. The memory hit her with brutal clarity, the smell of grease and cold air, the flickering diner sign, the way exhaustion had curdled into anger so sharp she'd tasted metal. The stranger in the tailored coat, the look on his face when she'd snapped, "Men like you buy silence with salaries." She had meant it then. Or maybe she'd meant something older, something heavier. Her mouth went dry. "That was you," she said, the words barely more than breath. Grant nodded once. "Yes." For a moment, Claire couldn't hear anything except the rush of blood in her ears. Shame flooded her so fast, it stole the strength from her knees. She took a step back then, another reaching instinctively for the chair behind her. I didn't know," she said. "I was angry. I know," he said. The calmness of his voice made it worse. Claire straightened abruptly, the last of her composure snapping into place. This was it, the moment she'd been bracing for since she stepped onto the subway platform, the reason the shirt had felt heavier with every passing minute. "I should go," she said, already reaching for her bag. "I'm sorry for wasting your time." "I understand if Sit," Grant said. The word wasn't sharp, it wasn't loud, it was firm. Claire froze halfway between standing and leaving. "And I'm certainly not here to pretend that moment didn't happen." Claire looked at him, disbelief and humiliation tangling in her chest. "You should," she said, "pretend. It would be easier." "For who?" he asked. She didn't have an answer. Grant gestured toward the chair. "Please." After a beat, Claire sat. Her hands trembled now, no longer hidden. She didn't try to stop them. That night, Grant said, "You weren't wrong about one thing." Her head snapped up. "Power," he continued, "does have a way of buying silence, especially when people are afraid." Claire swallowed hard. "Then why are you?" Because he said gently, "You didn't look afraid." The words landed unexpectedly. "You looked exhausted," he went on, "and angry, and very tired of swallowing things that hurt." Claire stared at the floor, throat tight. "I was fired that morning," she admitted quietly, publicly, with laughter. Grant's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And the shirt?" he asked. She laughed once, bitter and short. "Jenna gave it to me. As a joke. As armor. I never meant for it to be seen." "And yet," he said, "here it is." Claire nodded. "I don't hate CEOs," she said. "I hate what happens when people stop being accountable. When leadership turns into theater." Grant studied her for a long moment, then said, "My father ran his company that way." Claire looked up surprised. "Fear-based," he continued. "Public humiliation disguised as motivation. He believed people performed better when they were scared." "And did they?" Claire asked. Grant's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "They left," he said, "in waves." Silence settled again, different this time, less sharp. "More honest." "I recognized you in the hallway," Grant said after a moment. "I recognized the look before I recognized the words." Claire closed her eyes briefly. "I thought I was done," she said. "When you asked that question in the interview about the shirt, I thought that was it. And yet you answered," he said. "You didn't deflect. You didn't apologize for existing." She shrugged weakly. "I didn't have the energy to pretend anymore." Grant nodded. "That's why I waited." "Waited for what?" "For this," he said. "For honesty? Without witnesses." Claire's chest tightened. "I insulted you," she said. "Directly." "Yes," he agreed. "And then you showed up anyway. That takes something." She laughed, softly, incredulous. "Stupidity, conviction," he corrected. The door remained closed. Lydia hadn't returned yet. The world outside this office felt far away. "I don't know what happens now," Claire said finally. "But I don't want this job if it means becoming quiet again." Grant held her gaze. "Then we're aligned," he said. Her breath caught. "I won't offer you a safe environment," he continued. "Work shouldn't be safe, it should be honest. But I will offer you one where disagreement doesn't cost dignity." Claire felt something inside her loosen. Not relief, not trust, but possibility. Grant stepped back toward his desk as footsteps sounded faintly in the hallway. "Lydia will be back in a moment," he said. "We'll finish onboarding." And after that? Claire asked. Grant met her eyes, something resolute there now. After that, he said, we see what survives. The door handle turned, and Claire realized she wasn't afraid of what came next. She was afraid of how much she wanted to believe him. Instead, he stood near the window again, one hand resting lightly against the glass as the city moved below them. The door had closed once more behind Lydia, paperwork momentarily forgotten, and the office felt suspended in a pocket of time. Claire wasn't sure she trusted. Your shirt, Grant said at last, still facing the window, is ugly. Claire blinked. The word was so ordinary, so unexpected that it slipped past her defenses before she could brace for it. But he added, turning now his expression, calm, your reason for wearing it is familiar. Shock landed first, then confusion, then something warmer, more dangerous, hope. Grant returned to his desk, but instead of sitting, he leaned against its edge, arms crossed loosely as if he were making a confession rather than a decision. My father, he said, was exactly the kind of CEO you were talking about. Claire didn't interrupt. She sensed this wasn't a story meant to be rushed. He built his company fast, Grant continued. Brilliantly by some standards. And he ruled it like a kingdom. Loyalty mattered more than truth. Silence more than skill. People lasted about 18 months before burning out or breaking. Claire's chest tightened. The pattern was painfully recognizable. I grew up watching people shrink around him, Grant said. At dinner tables. In meetings. Even at home. Especially at home. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. When I started Waverly Meridian, I promised myself two things. 1, never confuse fear with respect. And 2, never hire people who were good at disappearing. Claire swallowed. That's why the interview ran long, Grant said. I wanted to see what you'd do. She lifted her head. You wanted to see if I'd hide. Yes, he said simply. Or soften yourself into something more palatable. And when I didn't, Grant's mouth curved slightly. Not a smile. Something more restrained. You stayed, he said. You told the truth, even when it cost you points. Claire let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. I've been wrong before, she said quietly. About places that looked good on the outside. Grant nodded. So have I. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a slim folder, placing it on the desk between them. The gesture was deliberate, unhurried. I'm offering you the position, he said. The words hit Claire like a wave she hadn't prepared for. She stared at the folder, then at him. Just like that, not just like that, Grant replied. Because there's a condition. Her pulse quickened again. Of course there was. You get this job, he said, if you agree to one thing. Claire waited. Never shrink yourself here, Grant said. Not for me. Not for the board. Not for comfort or convenience. She felt the weight of that land slowly, heavily. I don't want obedience, he continued. I want friction. I want people who speak when it would be easier to stay quiet. If you ever feel yourself doing what you did before holding back to survive, I expect you to tell me. Claire laughed softly, disbelief threading through it. You're asking me to trust you. I'm asking you to hold me accountable, Grant corrected. She looked down at the folder again. The paper inside might as well have been glowing. And if I don't, she asked. Then you shouldn't be here, he said. And neither should I. The honesty of it left her momentarily breathless. Grant stepped back, giving her space. Take your time. She opened the folder with hands that trembled, despite her efforts to steady them. The offer letter was clean, direct. The salary made her inhale sharply, more than she'd expected, more than she'd asked for. Benefits, autonomy, trust written between the lines. It felt unreal. This is generous, she said. It's fair, Grant replied. Good work, deserves that. Claire stared at the signature line. Her name would look small there. Vulnerable. She thought of the alley. The diner light flickering. The anger that had spilled out because it had nowhere else to go. She thought of the conference room where laughter had silenced her. Of the escort to the elevator. Of promising herself never again. Her pen hovered. What if I fail, she asked quietly. What if I disappoint you? Grant met her gaze steadily. Then we deal with it, he said. Like adults. Without humiliation, she nodded, throat tight. Claire signed. The pen scratched across the paper, sealing something she wasn't entirely sure she understood yet. When she finished, she sat back, exhaling shakily. There, she said, I've either made a very brave decision or a very foolish one. Grant smiled then. Not broadly, but genuinely. Most important ones feel like that, he said. Lydia returned moments later, pausing when she took in the scene, the signed letter, Claire's flushed expression, Grant's unguarded calm. I see we're moving forward, Lydia said. Yes, Grant replied. Claire's joining us. Lydia's smile widened, real and unforced. I'm glad. As Lydia reviewed next steps, Claire listened with half an ear, her mind still circling the moment she'd just stepped into. The office no longer felt like a cage. But it didn't feel safe either. It felt honest. When Lydia left again, Grant walked Claire to the door himself. One more thing, he said as she reached for the handle. She turned. Don't wear the shirt again, he said lightly. I'll think about it, she said. Grant nodded. Fair? As Claire stepped into the hallway offer letter tucked under her arm, she felt something unfamiliar bloom beneath the disbelief. Not trust, but the fragile beginning of it, and she wondered as she walked toward her new desk whether she had just found refuge or a more beautiful version of the same old test. The team space smelled like coffee and printer toner and something citrusy that tried unsuccessfully to pretend it wasn't disinfectant. Claire stood just inside the doorway, blazer still buttoned, offer letter folded neatly in her bag, and felt that familiar tightening in her chest. The one that came whenever she entered a room full of people who would soon decide who she was. Allowed to be. Everyone, Lydia said, clapping her hands lightly, this is Claire Halston. She's joining us as marketing strategy lead. A dozen faces turned toward her. Smiles came easily. Not the forced kind, the curious kind. A mix of ages, some fresh, sharp-eyed, others seasoned lines earned rather than hidden. People who looked like they'd lived a little. Welcome, someone said. Glad you're here. We've been waiting for direction, another added with a half grin. Claire exhaled a fraction. Thank you, she said. I'm excited to work with all of you. And she meant it, or at least she wanted to. Introductions followed in a gentle blur. Names, roles, handshakes, a senior analyst named Ben with a dry sense of humor. Marisol, from content, who spoke quickly and listened carefully. Hannah, who managed timelines like a chessboard and had the calm confidence of someone who'd survived worse deadlines than these. Competent, warm, human. So far so good. Your desk is over here, Marisol said, gesturing toward a corner with a wide window and a plant that looked alive on purpose. We figured you'd want some light. I do, Claire replied. Thank you. She slipped out of her blazer to hang it on the hook by the desk, relief washing over her shoulders as the fabric fell away. She didn't see it happen, but she felt it. The pause, the almost imperceptible hitch in the air. Someone's eyes flicked downward. Someone else glanced away too quickly. A whisper passed, soft as a draft. Claire's heart sank. She looked down. CEOs are trash. There it was. Out in the open, no glass, no blazer, no buffer. She started reaching instinctively for the blazer again, but it was too late. The words had already landed. Oh, someone murmured. Another whisper followed. Then another. Claire's chest tightened, memories flooding in uninvited. The glass conference room, the laughter, the way silence could bruise deeper than shouting ever had. She forced a small smile, finished hanging the blazer, and turned back to the group as if nothing had happened. Okay, she said, voice steadier than she felt. Why don't you walk me through what you're currently working on? They did, because professionals do. They talked metrics and timelines and brand voice. They treated her like a leader, not a spectacle. But Claire felt it anyway, the awareness, the hum beneath the conversation. By mid-morning, the pressure had built into something unbearable. She excused herself quietly and headed down the hall past the glass offices, past the conference room, where Grant sat deep in conversation, unaware or pretending to be. She pushed into the nearest restroom and locked herself into a stall. Claire leaned her forehead against the cool metal partition and breathed. In, out, slow. She counted. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. The way she'd learned after the last job. The way you learned to keep from shaking when the walls felt too close. It's happening again, her mind whispered. You showed too much. You let them see you. She stayed there longer than she meant to, grounding herself in the quiet hum of the ventilation fan. Then she heard it. Laughter. Outside the restroom. Light at first. Then louder. 2 voices, maybe 3. Unmistakable. Her stomach dropped. There it is, she thought. The other shoe. She stayed still, heart pounding, every old instinct screaming at her to disappear. To wait it out. To let it pass. The laughter continued. Not cruel. Not sharp. Confused, Claire inched toward the sink, careful not to make a sound. She washed her hands slowly, listening. Did you see the mugs? Someone said, laughing again. I nearly spit my coffee, another replied. I mean, that's one way to handle it. Handle what? Claire cracked the door open just enough to hear. Grant doesn't do subtle, the first voice said. But honestly, it's kind of brilliant. Curiosity wrestled with fear. She stepped out. 2 employees stood by the counter near the coffee machine, both holding mugs. One was Hannah, the other was Ben. They looked up when they saw her. Oh hey, Hannah said, a little startled. Then she smiled. We were just. Ben lifted his mug, turning it so the text faced Claire. Not all CEOs, but enough of them. Claire stared. Her brain struggled to catch up. What is that? She asked. New company mugs, Ben said, delivered like 10 minutes ago. Hannah shook her head, still amused. Apparently, Grant ordered them after the interview cycle wrapped. Claire's mouth opened, closed. They're company mugs, she asked. Yep, Ben said. Everyone got one. As if on cue, Marisol walked by holding the same mug, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Bold right, she said cheerfully. I love it. It's like a disclaimer with caffeine. Claire felt something give way in her chest. Not fully, but enough. They're not about me, she asked quietly. Hannah's expression softened. No, she said. They're about us. Ben nodded. About culture. About not pretending power doesn't screw things up sometimes, and about not shaming people for saying it out loud, Marisol added. Claire blinked rapidly, overwhelmed by the sudden shift. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had been named. Diffused, turned into something shared instead of isolating. Grant's way, she realized. Not to protect her by erasing what happened, but by making sure she wasn't alone in it. I'm sorry, Claire said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. I didn't mean to bring anything like that into the office. Marisol waved it off. Please. We've been talking about leadership issues for months. You just wore the summary. Ben grinned, and honestly, it takes guts. Claire laughed softly, surprised by the sound of it. Later, back at her desk, blazer back on mug, warming her hands, Claire watched the team move around her with easy competence. No whispering now. No sideways looks, just work. She caught her reflection in the window, older than she felt, steadier than she feared. The shirt had been seen, and she hadn't been punished. Still, as the day wore on, a question lingered beneath the relief. Was this grace? Or just a better disguise? Claire took a sip from the mug, reading the words again, and wondered how long hope could survive before it learned to trust. The first email came before lunch. Subject line: brand alignment brief discussion. It was addressed to Claire with 3 names, CC'd she didn't recognize yet. She'd seen him only once so far, passing in the hallway, impeccably dressed, silver at his temples, smile calibrated to warmth. The kind of man who looked like he belonged in photographs with donors and governors. The kind who never raised his voice because he never had to. Claire reread the email twice. It said very little. That was the point. By the time the department meeting was announced for that afternoon, the air had changed. Not dramatically, no alarms, no panic. Just a subtle shift, like pressure before a storm. The conference room filled slowly. Laptops opened, coffee mugs set down. Claire took a seat near the middle notebook, closed hands resting lightly on the table. She reminded herself to breathe from the diaphragm, not the chest. Grant sat at the head, calm as ever. Lydia was there too, composed, unreadable. He didn't take the seat beside Grant. He chose one across the table, angled just enough to command attention without claiming authority. He smiled as he sat, making eye contact with everyone, pausing a fraction longer on Claire. "Afternoon," he said pleasantly. "Thanks for making time." His voice was smooth. Trained, it carried without effort. "This won't take long," Elliot continued. "I just wanted to address something. The way rooms go quiet before a line is crossed." "I've been hearing some chatter," Elliot said, hands folded loosely. "External and internal. About perception." He turned slightly toward Claire. "About tone." Grant's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Claire didn't move. "In our world," Elliot went on, "perception is reality. Investors don't have context. They have headlines, images, impressions." He smiled again, softer this time. "And while I personally appreciate passion, I worry about how certain expressions might be interpreted." No one spoke. Elliot leaned back. "Claire, would you mind clarifying something for us?" There it was, the blade wrapped in velvet. She met his eyes. "Clarifying, what exactly your stance," he said lightly. "Toward leadership, authority, the structures that keep companies stable." A few people shifted in their chairs. Specifically, Elliot continued the message conveyed by that garment on your first day. Claire felt every eye flick toward her. The shirt again. "Always the shirt." "I'm sure it was meant ironically," Elliot said, "but irony doesn't always translate to shareholders. Some might find it hostile." "Hostile?" Claire waited a beat before answering. "Let the word hang." "Is that a question," she asked, "or an accusation?" Elliot chuckled softly. "Just an invitation to reassure the room." Grant straightened. "Elliot, it's all right," Claire said gently without looking away from Elliot. She felt the old instinct rise, the urge to over-explain, to apologize preemptively, to make herself smaller so the room would stay calm. She didn't. She sat taller. "When I wear something," Claire said evenly, "or say something, it's not about provocation. It's about honesty." Elliot nodded, encouraging. "Of course. I don't have hostility toward leadership," Claire continued. "I have hostility toward cruelty." The word landed differently than she expected. Sharper, cleaner, not raised, not emotional, just true. The room went still. "I've worked under leaders who confused fear with respect," she said, "who silenced dissent by calling it disloyalty, who protected themselves by blaming those below them." Elliot's smile thinned almost imperceptibly. "That's not leadership," Claire said. "That's negligence with a title." Someone inhaled sharply. Claire didn't look to see who. "If that makes me dangerous to the brand," she went on, "then the brand should ask itself what it's protecting." Silence. Grant didn't interrupt. Elliot held her gaze, measuring. Not angry, not embarrassed. Interested. "That's quite a statement," he said finally. Claire nodded once. "It's also my line in the sand." The quiet stretched. Then Elliot smiled again, wider this time. "Well," he said, clapping his hands softly, "once I appreciate the candor." "Truly." He turned slightly toward the room. "This is exactly the kind of open dialogue that keeps us sharp." A few nervous chuckles followed. Elliot stood. "No further questions. Thank you, everyone." The meeting dissolved slowly, people gathering their things, murmurs restarting in low tones. Claire remained seated for a moment, pulse loud in her ears. Grant caught her eye from across the table. He gave her a single nod. Not approval, recognition. As the room emptied, Elliot lingered. "Miss Halston," he said pleasantly, stepping closer. "May I offer some advice?" Claire rose. "I'm listening." "Be careful," he said softly. "Principles are admirable, but they can be inconvenient." She met his smile with one of her own. "So can complacency." Elliot's eyes flickered just once. "Welcome to the big leagues," he said, and walked away. Claire stood there, the echo of his words settling into her bones. This wasn't over. She'd survived the room, but she'd been seen. And she knew enough now to recognize a man who didn't lose. Only waited. The numbers were wrong. Claire felt it before she could explain it, the way you feel, a step that isn't there before your foot hits air. She stared at the dashboard on her screen, blinking once then again, as if the figures might rearrange themselves out of embarrassment. They didn't. Too good at first, almost miraculous. Conversion rates climbing at a pace that made no sense, cost per acquisition improbably low. For a moment, just a moment, she'd felt the flicker of pride. Then the refresh, and the floor dropped out. Red arrows, sharp declines, engagement falling off a cliff, revenue projections collapsing into something ugly and defensible only by excuses. This can't be right, she whispered. Around her, the office hummed with late afternoon energy. The board review was in less than an hour. This campaign, her campaign, was the centerpiece. The one that was supposed to silence doubts, justify, trust close mouths. Claire pulled up the historical view. Her fingers moved faster now, heart rate ticking up. The data told a story that contradicted itself. Metrics didn't swing like this unless something broke, or someone touched them. She stood and crossed the floor to Daniel Reyes's desk, the analyst assigned to her team. He was in his early 30s, brilliant, soft-spoken, the kind of man who apologized when you bumped into him. "Daniel," she said quietly, "can you come look at this with me?" He rolled his chair over, eyes scanning the screen. His brow furrowed almost immediately. "That's weird," he said. Weird was not the word she wanted. "Run the permissions log," Claire said. "Now." Daniel hesitated. "Only admins can, please." Something in her voice cut through. He nodded and typed quickly, fingers flying, the glow of the screen reflecting in his glasses. Seconds stretched. Then Daniel went very still. "Claire," he said under his breath. "Someone changed the dashboard permissions." Her stomach tightened. "When?" "Early this morning. Around 6:12 a.m. She did the math without thinking. That was before she arrived. Before most of her team? Who, she asked. Daniel swallowed. The access trail routes through strategic oversight. Her chest went cold. Strategic oversight didn't touch campaign analytics. They never had. "That's Elliot's division," Daniel said quietly, like saying it louder might summon him. Claire closed her eyes for half a second. This is how it starts. She'd seen it before. Not here, but close enough it hurt. A narrative seeded gently, then watered with confusion. A problem introduced just in time for a public reckoning. The new hire. The outspoken one. "The woman with the shirt? Can you isolate the change?" she asked. Daniel nodded, but his hands were shaking now. "Yes, but Claire, the board review is in 15 minutes. She knew. She also knew exactly what would happen if she walked into that room with corrupted data. It wouldn't matter that it wasn't her fault. It would only matter that it was hers. "Can you restore the original dataset?" she asked. "I can," Daniel said. "But the audit trail will show it was altered." "And who altered it?" Her pulse thudded in her ears. "Expose it, or smooth it over. One would cost her safety. The other would cost her something worse." Claire, Daniel said softly. "If this comes back on you, it won't," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. She pulled up the permissions log herself, scrolling past timestamps, IP addresses, internal signatures. Clean, precise. A change request authorized through Elliot Voss's department. No name. Just process. Plausible deniability wrapped in policy. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, indifferent. She thought of the conference room, the way Elliot had smiled, the way he'd framed her as a liability without raising his voice. Dangerous to the brand. She thought of Grant watching without intervening, and she thought of the shirt. Not the words, but the reason. "Daniel," she said, standing. "Restore the original data. Lock the permissions." He hesitated. "And the board?" She grabbed her tablet. "I'll handle the board." She walked toward the elevator with purpose, now heels striking the floor in a steady rhythm that matched her breath. Inside the mirrored walls, her reflection looked composed, almost serene. She didn't feel serene. She felt clear. The elevator doors closed. As it descended, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Careful, Claire. Timing matters. She didn't need to ask who it was from. The doors opened onto the executive floor. The boardroom sat at the end of the hall, glass walls glowing softly, silhouettes moving inside. 15 minutes ago, she'd been a success story. Now she was a problem waiting to be managed. Claire paused outside the room, tablet in hand. She could walk in present, the clean data, say nothing about the interference. Let the numbers speak. Let the praise come. Let the trap reset for another day. Or she could open her mouth. She placed her hand on the glass door. This was the moment. Not the shirt, not the interview. This. She took one breath, then another, and stepped inside. The boardroom was colder than it needed to be. Not by accident, Claire knew that. Cold kept people alert. Guarded. Less emotional. The long table gleamed under recessed lights, bottled water aligned like props in a rehearsal of power. Most of the board members were older. 60s, 70s, men who'd built careers when loyalty mattered more than truth, and silence was considered professionalism. A few women, sharp-eyed, unreadable. Claire took a seat near the end tablet, resting on her knees. She could feel her pulse in her throat. Elliot stood at the front, relaxed hands loosely clasped, voice already filling the room with practiced ease. As you'll see, he said, clicking to the next slide, the campaign showed early promise but suffered an unexpected downturn. Unexpected. Claire watched the numbers appear clean now. Daniel had restored them just in time. The real data. Solid. Defensible. Elliot paused, brows knitting in what looked like concern. This discrepancy, he continued, raises questions about oversight, specifically within the marketing execution phase. He turned slightly toward her. A phase overseen by our newest leadership hire. There it was. Not an accusation, an implication. Claire felt heat rise in her face. She clasped her hands together, grounding herself in the table edge, the feel of polished wood under her fingertips. Elliot sighed lightly. I'm sure this wasn't intentional, but it does highlight the risks of cultural misalignment. One board member leaned forward. Are you saying this was negligence? Elliot smiled gently. I'm saying it warrants discussion. Claire stood. The sound of her chair sliding back cut through the room sharper than she expected. I'd like to speak, she said. Every eye turned. Grant looked at her, expression unreadable. Claire's hands were shaking. She didn't try to hide it. She set her tablet on the table and met the room head-on. With respect, she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers, the data did not suffer an unexpected downturn. Elliot's smile didn't falter. Claire, it was altered, she continued. This morning, without authorization from my team. A murmur rippled through the room. Claire tapped her screen. Here are the access logs. Time-stamped. The permissions change originated from strategic oversight. Silence. Elliot tilted his head. Are you accusing my department of tampering? I'm stating a fact, Claire said. One that's documented. One of the older board members adjusted his glasses. Why bring this up now? Because this review is based on truth, Claire replied. And because if I stay silent, I become complicit. Elliot chuckled softly. Let's slow down, he said. We're taking serious accusations. From his eyes flicked briefly to her chest, though she wore a neutral blouse. Now the woman who arrived on her first day, wearing an anti-CEO slogan. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. There it is, Elliot continued smoothly. The pattern. Hostility dressed up as integrity. Claire felt something crack, not outward but deep. The old fear flared. The memory of being laughed out of rooms, of being reduced. She opened her mouth, and then Grant spoke. The mistake is mine. The words didn't land loudly. They landed clean. Every head turned toward him. Grant stood slowly, buttoning his jacket with deliberate calm. He didn't look at Elliot. He looked at the board. I authorized a temporary permissions review this morning, he said, without adequately notifying all stakeholders. Claire's breath caught. Elliot's eyes narrowed. Just a fraction. If the data appeared inconsistent, Grant continued, that responsibility rests with me. A board member frowned. You're saying you altered the dashboard. I'm saying, Grant replied evenly, that the systems under my authority allowed a change that created confusion. Elliot stepped in quickly. Grant, that's not necessary. It is, Grant said, cutting him off without raising his voice. Because what is necessary is clarity. He turned to the board. I'm requesting an immediate third-party audit of the data access trail. Full transparency. The room went still. One of the women on the board nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. Elliot smiled tightly. An audit will delay momentum. Integrity sometimes does, Grant said. Claire stared at him, heart hammering. He was buying her time, not shielding her. Standing with her, Grant continued. Claire Halston flagged an inconsistency and responded exactly as I expect a leader to respond, with diligence and honesty. Elliot's jaw tightened. If that makes her uncomfortable to work with, Grant added, then she's doing her job. Silence again, deeper this time. The board chair cleared his throat. Very well. We'll proceed with the audit. In the meantime, the campaign stands as presented. Grant nodded. Thank you. The meeting adjourned in a flurry of quiet movement. Papers gathered, chairs slid back. Elliot approached Claire as others filed out. Well played, he said softly. You have a powerful advocate. Claire met his eyes. I have the truth. He smiled thinly. Be careful who you trust with it. Grant waited until the room was empty. Then he looked at her. You okay? He asked. She swallowed. You didn't have to do that. Yes, he said simply. I did. They stood there, the weight of what had just happened settling between them. This wasn't over. But for the first time, Claire wasn't standing alone in the room where power decided who broke. And somewhere beneath the fear, something steadier took root. Claire didn't remember standing up from the boardroom table. One moment she was there, heart pounding, spine still braced for impact, and the next she was in the hallway, heels clicking too fast, breath coming shallow. She smiled at someone who passed her, nodded at another muscle memory, carrying her forward like a well-trained animal. You're fine, she told herself. Just get back to your office. Her hands betrayed her first. By the time she reached the elevators, her fingers were trembling so badly she had to clasp them together to steady the badge lanyard against her chest. The hallway felt too bright, too loud. Every sound magnified. The elevator doors slid open. Grant was inside. He didn't speak, didn't gesture. He just stepped back slightly to make room, eyes on her face, in a way that wasn't assessing or managerial. Seeing. Claire stepped in. The doors closed with a soft chime. Only then did her knees wobble. She leaned back against the wall, breath hitching despite her best efforts. She hated this part, the delayed collapse, the moment when adrenaline let go and left her exposed. Grant pressed the button for the lower floors, but didn't turn away. She nodded, though the breath came out uneven. I'm fine, she said automatically. I know, he replied. That doesn't mean you're not shaking. That did it. Just a little. Her jaw clenched. She looked down at the floor, at the brushed metal, reflecting the outline of her shoes. I didn't expect you to do that, she said. In there. Grant leaned back against the opposite wall, hands loose at his sides. I know. She let out a short, humorless laugh. I really thought, if it came down to it, you'd let me take the fall. He didn't answer immediately. The elevator hummed, descending. When I was 14, Grant said my mother worked for my father. Claire's head lifted. She was brilliant, he continued. Operations. Quiet. Relentless. The kind of person who made everything work without needing credit. Claire said nothing. She didn't trust her voice yet. 1 quarter went bad, Grant said. Not because of her. Because of a strategic gamble my father made and refused to admit. His jaw tightened, not with anger but with something older. More settled. They needed someone to blame, he went on. Someone who wouldn't fight back. Someone whose exit would look clean. Claire's chest ached. She didn't even argue, Grant said softly. She just packed her desk and came home early one day. Told me she'd been let go. He swallowed. I watched her spend the next year questioning her worth. Not her skills, her worth. The elevator slowed. I promised myself, Grant said, meeting Claire's eyes now, that if I ever had power, I would never use it to protect a lie. The words landed like a hand on her back, steadying. Claire felt heat behind her eyes and hated herself for it. She turned her face slightly, blinking hard. I've waited my whole career, she said, voice rough, to hear someone say that out loud. Grant nodded once. Most people don't. The elevator doors opened to a quiet floor. Neither of them moved to step out. I was ready, Claire admitted. I had already rehearsed how I'd leave, what I'd say, how I'd explain it to myself so it wouldn't hurt as much. Grant studied her expression, unreadable but open. You shouldn't have to armor yourself just to do honest work. Her breath hitched. Just once. She pressed her thumb into her palm, grounding herself in the sensation. I'm not used to being backed up, she said. Not like that. Not when it actually costs something. It cost me nothing. I wasn't willing to pay, Grant replied. And it bought the company something valuable. What truth, he said. The doors remained open. Somewhere down the hall a phone rang. Life continued. Claire wiped beneath her eyes quickly, more angry at the moisture than ashamed of it. Thank you, she said. For seeing it. For seeing you, he corrected. That was the second crack. She exhaled slowly, shoulders dropping for the first time all day. I don't know what Elliot will do next, she said. Grant's mouth curved, not in a smile but in resolve. Neither does he. The elevator chimed again, a gentle reminder. Grant stepped aside. Go home early, he said. You've earned it. And you, she asked. I'll be here, he replied, making sure the audit happens. Claire hesitated, then nodded. As she stepped out, she paused, turning back just enough to meet his eyes one more time. You know, she said quietly, if this place survives because of what you did today, it won't be because you protected your reputation. Grant held her gaze. It'll be because we protected the right thing. The doors closed between them. Claire stood alone in the hallway, heart still unsteady, but something inside her had shifted. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was bracing for the next blow. She felt held, not by a person, by a principle. And she knew deep in her bones that the storm wasn't over. But she also knew this, she wasn't invisible anymore. Elliot caught her near the stairwell. Not by accident. Claire recognized the timing immediately, the lull between meetings, the hour when people scattered for late lunches or private calls. The hallway was quiet enough to hear the soft buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Claire, he said, stepping into her path with practiced ease. Do you have a moment? She stopped but didn't step closer. Distance mattered. If this is about the audit, she said, you should speak to legal. Elliot smiled, thin and controlled. I thought we might save everyone some trouble. There it was, the tone shift, not hostile, managerial. You're talented, he continued, but talent without discretion tends to shorten careers. Claire studied him the way she'd learned to study storms, by watching what moved underneath the calm. You've made yourself visible, Elliot said. That's admirable. But visibility invites interpretation. Is this a threat? She asked. He chuckled softly. It's advice. He leaned in just enough that his voice dropped. People like me don't lose positions. We lose battles. Quietly. And we remember who made noise. Claire felt the old reflex flicker, the instinct to shrink, to smooth, to survive. She didn't. She met his eyes. You altered data. Elliot straightened. You don't have proof. I don't need it, she said. You'll supply it. Something hardened in his expression. You think this company will burn one of its own for you, he asked. I think, Claire replied evenly, that a company that doesn't will eventually burn itself. Elliot stepped back, smile returning like a mask snapped into place. We'll see, he said. Careful on the stairs. He walked away. Claire stood there for a moment, heart steady, pulse, loud but controlled. She didn't record the conversation. She didn't write it down. She remembered everything. 2 days later, Lydia asked her to come to HR. Legal was already there. So was Grant. And Elliot. The room felt different from the boardroom, smaller, tighter, built for truth rather than theater. Folders sat open, Screens glowed with logs, timestamps, emails that told a story without adjectives. Lydia spoke first. "The audit is complete." Elliot leaned back, arms crossed. "And the data alteration originated from an account under your direct authority," Lydia said. "Multiple times. Across 3 campaigns. That proves nothing about intent." Legal slid a document across the table. "It proves policy violations. And concealment." Elliot's eyes flicked to Claire. "So this is what you wanted," he said coolly. "A spectacle." Claire shook her head. "No." Grant watched her closely. Elliot scoffed. "Don't pretend this isn't personal. You walked in wearing that shirt, looking for a fight." Claire took a breath. "I walked in looking for work," she said. "You turned it into a test." Lydia turned to Claire. "We need to know what you're asking for." Elliot smiled, faintly confident. "Yes. Let's hear it. Severance, a public apology, my resignation." The room went still. Claire looked at the table, then up at Lydia. "At legal, at Grant. I'm not asking for revenge," she said. Elliot blinked. "I'm asking for accountability," Claire continued. "And protection." "Protection?" Legal asked. "For the next person," Claire said. "The one without witnesses, without allies, without the leverage of being right at the right time." Grant's expression softened. "I want clear separation of data permissions," Claire said. "Mandatory audit trails reviewed by an independent team, whistleblower protections that don't require heroics, and leadership reviews that don't punish dissent." Elliot laughed, sharp and incredulous. "You're asking to rewrite governance because you felt uncomfortable." "I'm asking," Claire said calmly, "because I wasn't the first. And I won't be the last if nothing changes." Silence. Legal nodded slowly. "Those requests are reasonable." Elliot's smile vanished. "You'd really let me walk?" he asked Grant. "After everything I've done for this company," Grant met his gaze. "I'm letting the process work." "That's a mistake," Elliot said quietly. "Maybe," Grant replied, "but it's an honest one." Elliot stood. "Then you're all making a very expensive moral statement." He left without another word. The door closed. Claire exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders in a slow wave. Lydia looked at her. "You could have asked for more." Claire shook her head. "This is enough." Grant waited until Legal stepped out. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I think so. You did something rare," he said. "You changed the shape of the room." Claire gave a tired smile. "Let's see if it holds." As she left HR, the hallway felt quieter. Not safer yet, but cleaner. Truth had cost something. Not her job, not her dignity, but the illusion that power always wins. And as she walked back toward her office, Claire knew the story wasn't finished. Justice had moved, slowly, deliberately, and that somehow felt like the beginning of something sturdier than victory. The rumors reached the atrium before the chairs did. By the time employees began filtering in the air, already carried a careful curiosity. Voices lowered, glances exchanged, a shared sense that something had shifted and no one quite knew how to name it yet. The audit had concluded. Elliot's office light no longer came on in the mornings. Meetings felt different, quieter, straighter. Claire stood behind the stage, curtain hands folded loosely at her waist. She wasn't nervous, not in the old way. She wore a navy blazer over a simple blouse, and underneath, hidden for now, the shirt. Folded flat against her skin like a memory you don't erase, just stop carrying everywhere. Grant stood nearby, not hovering, just present. Lydia was seated in the front row, posture open, eyes steady. The town hall was voluntary, but the room was full. People wanted to understand what kind of place this was becoming. The host stepped up, offered a brief introduction, and then said Claire's name. She walked out into the light. Applause rose, polite at first, then warmer. "I was asked," she began, voice calm and unhurried, "to speak about culture." A few nods, some knowing smiles. "And culture," she continued, "isn't slogans or values printed on walls. It's what happens when no one's watching, when decisions feel small enough to justify." The room grew still. Claire took a breath. "I want to show you something," she said. She unbuttoned her blazer. A ripple moved through the crowd as the letters became visible. CEOs are trash. Not laughter. Not gasps. Recognition. This shirt, Claire said gently, isn't a joke. It's what happens when people stop believing they matter. She scanned the room, not searching, not accusing, simply seeing. I wore it because I came from a place where speaking up was punished, where honesty cost jobs, where leadership hid behind titles instead of listening. She paused, then added, I wore it because it felt safer to be dismissed as angry than to be invisible. A few heads bowed. Someone in the back wiped at their eyes. I'm not proud of the shirt, Claire said, but I'm not ashamed of why it existed. She rested her hands on the podium steady. Shame thrives in silence. Meaning doesn't. She told her story not with bitterness, not with flourish, but as a witness. The meeting where she was laughed out of the room, the escort to the elevator, the year she spent questioning whether integrity was just another word for unemployment. And then she said, I came here. She looked toward Grant, not as a gesture, just a glance. I found a company willing to pause when something didn't feel right. Leaders who didn't confuse authority with immunity. People who chose audit over avoidance. She reached for the hem of the shirt. Armor has its place, Claire said quietly. Especially when you're tired. Especially when you've been hurt. She pulled the shirt up and over her head. No drama, no flourish. Just a simple motion. Underneath the blouse. Unremarkable. Human. I don't need armor here anymore, she said, folding the shirt once neatly. But someone out there still does. She said it on the podium. And that's why this matters. Silence filled the room, not the heavy kind, the listening kind. We don't build trust by being perfect, Claire said. We build it by being accountable, by protecting dissent, by making it possible for people to tell the truth without preparing an exit speech. She smiled small, genuine. If we do that, she said, then maybe fewer people will need shirts like this. Applause rose, not loud but deep. Sustained. People stood, not all at once, but in waves. Claire stepped back from the podium, heart steady, chest light. As she returned to her seat, Grant met her eyes. No nod, no smile. Just shared understanding. After the town hall, the atrium buzzed with low conversation. People lingered. Conversations stretched longer than scheduled. Claire stood near the window, watching the city move below cars, inching along pedestrians, crossing streets with the unremarkable courage of ordinary days. Grant approached, stopping beside her. That took courage, he said. She shook her head. It took safety. He considered that. Then, we're doing something right. She looked down at the folded shirt in her hands. I don't know what happens next, she said. Grant smiled faintly. Neither do I. That's usually a good sign. Claire tucked the shirt into her bag, not as armor, not as evidence. As history. The room slowly emptied, the lights dimmed, the day moved on, and for the first time since she'd walked into this building with dread in her stomach, Claire felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not relief. Belonging. The kind that doesn't ask you to disappear to earn it. The offer didn't come with fanfare. No dramatic summons. No glass-walled conference room. Just an email marked board update, followed by a quiet knock on Claire's office door later that afternoon. She was standing by the window when Grant stepped in, holding a thin folder. The city below looked unchanged. Traffic inching along, people crossing streets, lives continuing without regard for the small revolutions that happened inside buildings like this. Do you have a minute? He asked. She nodded. Of course. He didn't sit. He placed the folder on her desk and slid it toward her. The board approved it this morning, he said. Unanimously. Claire opened the folder. Senior Director of Strategy. Expanded scope. Expanded authority. A meaningful raise, but not an obscene one. The kind that signaled trust, not ownership. Her throat tightened just slightly. I didn't vote, Grant added. She looked up. I recused myself, he said. For obvious reasons. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the title, for the restraint." "You earned it," Grant replied. "Without me?" She closed the folder carefully. "I accept." The word felt solid in her mouth. Not rushed, not desperate. Grant smiled, small, genuine. "Good." They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't demand filling. "There's something else," Grant said finally. Claire waited. He leaned back against the desk, not crossing any invisible lines, not stepping closer. "I won't pretend I haven't thought about you," he said. "As more than a colleague." Her pulse responded, but she stayed still. "And I won't pretend I'm not lonely," he continued. "That happens at the top. It's not a complaint, just a fact." Claire watched him closely now, not guarded but attentive. But Grant said, "I won't blur power lines. Not here. Not now. Not in ways that would make your success questionable or your consent complicated." The word landed with care. Consent. If he went on, "There's ever anything personal to explore, it would be after you're fully established. With transparency. With boundaries. With you holding the center of the decision." He paused. "And if the answer is no now or ever, I will respect that without consequence." Claire felt something deep in her chest settle. Not excitement. Safety. "I appreciate that," she said quietly. "More than you know." Grant nodded. "Good. That was the point." Another pause. She smiled, then not coy, not uncertain. "Right now," Claire said, "I want to build something. I want to do this job well, on my terms." Grant returned the smile. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." They shook hands, not ceremonially, not symbolically, just honestly. That evening, Claire stayed late, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She organized her desk, cleared old files, made space. When she finally left, the building was quiet, lights dimmed the hum of systems doing their unseen work. At home, she opened the bottom drawer of her dresser. She unfolded the shirt carefully. The letters were slightly faded now, softened by time and washing and distance. She didn't burn it. She didn't frame it. She folded it once, then again, and placed it in the drawer. Not as armor, not as protest, as a reminder of who she had been when she didn't feel safe, of what it had cost to speak, of what it looked like when dignity was returned, not by apology, but by action. Claire closed the drawer and turned off the light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new risks, but tonight she stood in the quiet of her own space, steady and unafraid. She had chosen her future, not because someone offered her power, but because someone respected her enough to let her claim it herself. And somewhere between the folded cotton and the calm of the room, the truth settled into place. Not all CEOs are trash, but no one should ever need a shirt to beg for respect. Sometimes healing begins where we least expect it, in a moment of fear, in a mistake we can't undo, in a truth we almost swallow to survive. This story reminds us that dignity isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It simply refuses to disappear. Many of us were taught that staying quiet was the price of keeping our place, that respect came from obedience, and that speaking up was a risk we couldn't afford. But silence has a cost too. It teaches us to doubt our worth, to shrink ourselves, until we fit into spaces that were never meant to hold our full humanity. Yet, sometimes, when we choose honesty over safety, something unexpected happens. Not punishment, but recognition. Not collapse, but clarity. The other lesson is quieter and just as powerful. Real leadership is not proven by control, but by what it protects. A leader who chooses truth over ego creates room for others to breathe, to heal, and to stand upright again. If this story touched something tender in you, let it be a reminder you are not too much, and you were never wrong for wanting respect. And when dignity is met with courage, healing has a way of finding its way home. Thank you for being here with us. Truly, stories like this don't exist without people willing to listen. With open hearts, people who know what it feels like to be misunderstood, overlooked, or quietly carrying more than they ever show. Your time matters. Your presence matters. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred a memory or offered a moment of comfort, please know that you're not alone in that feeling. These stories are told for connection, for the quiet reminder that dignity, kindness, and courage still matter. Every like, every share, and every subscribe helps us reach someone who may need this story more than we know. It's a simple gesture, but it carries something powerful forward. Thank you for being part of this space. Thank you for choosing stories that touch the soul. And thank you for helping us keep telling them one human moment at a time.